Hey, hi! Welcome to Someone Else's Movie, the original podcast where an actor, writer, director, or nebulous industry figure gives a little love to a movie they didn't make. I'm Norm Wilner, I'm a programmer at TIFF now, and this is the other thing I do. My guest this week is Valerie Buhagiar, an actor who broke out as part of the Toronto New Wave, starring alongside Don McKellar in Bruce McDonald's Roadkill and Highway 61, and went on to make movies herself, writing and directing The Anniversary and It's Hard to Be Human, among others. Her latest, Carmen, stars Natasha McElhone as a woman who, having spent her adult life tending to her brother, finds herself taking over his position as the priest in their small Mediterranean village when he dies. It's been on the festival circuit most of this year, and now it's playing in theaters across Canada and set to open in New York and Los Angeles September 23rd. It's a delicate little character story about faith, identity, and purpose, and McElhone is quietly great in the lead. You should see it. Valerie picked Ida, the Oscar-winning 2013 drama from writer-director Pawel that's also about faith, identity, and purpose. It's about a young novitiate in early 1960s Poland whose path to her vows is disrupted when she discovers her parents were Jews killed towards the end of World War II. Sent spinning by this revelation, Ida embarks on a journey of discovery in more ways than one, and winds up confronting her own past as well as her country's. Tonally, Ida is a very different work from Carmen, though, as you're about to hear, the two films have a lot to talk about. This is Someone Else's Movie.
I went with Ida because, the God relationship, it's just such a gorgeous film. It's stunning. And each shot is a photograph. And if I could make a film like that, I'm ready to die. Like, it's just like, it's so exquisite. And the writing, it's just this just minimal dialogue and the bold choices of the minimal dialogue, if you don't get it, too bad, watch it again. Or bits where they don't show the accident, or they don't show, they see, you see her jump out the window and that's it. And it's left with that. And understanding and respecting that the audience is smart enough to have a visceral sensation of what is going on here. And the choice that this young Ida makes at the end to go back to the church. It's huge. It's just, I just think it's an all-round perfect film.
Yeah. I should back up and just talk about how in awe I am of Pawlikowski's ability to do what he does as a storyteller, right. Because none of his films should work. Just on a strictly formal basis, they should fall apart. They should drift away because they're so involved. They're so concerned with the sublime and the things that we don't see and the things that are missing from the exposition, right? I mean, all of those movies, something like The Woman in the Fifth, which is this dream state of a movie with Ethan Hawke and Kristen Scott Thomas trying to connect to each other in Paris, sort of, but possibly not. They're the kind of movies that usually drive me out of the theater in like frustration. I watched the whole thing, but afterwards it's just like, it wasn't about anything. And all of his movies are about the thing that I want them to be about, which is how impossible it is to live a good life or achieve a connection, or they're so simple. My first experience of him was, I missed Last Resort the first time around. I didn't see it until later, but I saw My Summer of Love, the film he made with Emily Blunt and Natalie Press. I think that was in 2004. It's a sort of a queer coming of age film, but it's also about the rise of fundamentalism and intolerance in England in a way that just didn't even register at the time. It just felt like one character played by Paddy Considine who was being particularly obnoxious. And then going back a couple of years later, it's like, oh no, it's a cultural thing. He's just the embodiment of it, and it's happening all around them. That's his way in. And with Ida, he's dealing with, decades of cultural oppression and persecution and how it culminates in World War II, but it's neither the beginning nor the end of it. And we're just swimming in that world, along with this poor woman who still has agency and ability and manages to live a good life on her own terms, despite all of this death that surrounds her and anger and hate and oppression. And again, I look back at it, it's this sliver of a film. It's only 82 minutes long. It's incidences, it's tiny little vignettes, and it builds to something so powerful.
Yeah.
And he does that. He always does that. And it's, I would actually be angry at it if I was a filmmaker, because so few people can stick that landing every time.
Yeah. And also, I'm afraid to say all this, but then, when you make films, you've got producers and sales agents who come in and recut.
Sure.
And so they're afraid. They would be terrified of having a film like this. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Just like, nobody knows what happened. Nobody knows that they had a car accident because she was drunk. So you have to redo things so the fact that he's allowed to and goes for it fearlessly is fantastic. And then, of course, the big thing that I think everyone talks about is the aspect ratio of the 1.37 that he shoots with. And it's like, wow. I forgot to, Norm, because I shot Carmen back in 2019, but I looked, you reference all sorts of films.
Sure.
So that you can talk to your cinematographer and art department and so forth, and Ida was one of them. I was like, how she's so very small in the frame, and then builds as she leaves the nunnery, the convent. She gets bigger and bigger, and then she gets small again. But I didn't risk it, or wasn't allowed to risk it, let's say, or she's very, very, very tiny in the frame. And then there's all that space above, which makes so much sense if you know the church. That you are small and all that. And it is all those, that's why those churches were built as they were built, right? So he's brilliant. Yeah.
It's funny, too. It struck me this time through as a contrast to what Lars von Trier does in something like Breaking the Waves, where...
Oh, my God, yeah.
They're about the same thing, I think, ultimately, but so radically different. Von Trier's entire modus operandi is to force suffering on his characters to see how long it takes them to break and whether one person's resistance is saintly or just madness. And Pawlikowski he's not interested in that, I don't think. I don't think he's about suffering in the same way, but he's about purification in the kind of the same way Breaking the Waves is. It's a big leap, and please, if you disagree, by all means say so.
No, I think you're right. It's not about suffering. Like, I didn't feel like, especially Ida, right? You don't get the sense that Ida is suffering at all.
She's leaving it behind.
So at peace. She's so at peace. And that lovely actress, does a great job of that. It's her aunt who is suffering this internally, and it takes us a while to figure out why. Well, he doesn't give it to us till much later, and yes, of course, that grief that she's living with. But no one's acting like a victim, which is beautiful.
Yeah, there's a choice made early on, and it's obviously reflected from the writing, but it's about not playing into the expectations of guilt and suffering, right? They just refuse. They don't even consider it, I don't think.
Yeah. And, it takes a while before Ida cracks a smile. It's when she's in the car with her aunt, right? It's like, wow, right. Okay, there we go. And then we don't see a beam of sunlight till they're at the cemetery, the Jewish cemetery. I was like, wow, this is amazing. He's really thought this out. It's poetry. It's beautiful.
Yeah, and it opens up so many. They're not even questions; they're just themes that float around. But the nature of Ida, who starts as Anna and wants to be a nun, and or to take the habit, and her parents are Jewish, her family is Jewish. This is like she's a survivor of something that, again, is just, it's never articulated. It's just there, and I don't think I've seen it dealt with so offhandedly the idea that someone who survived something so horrific would want to disappear into another faith or another religion. I mean, she must have been one or two when the war ended, but I knew my grandparents sort of growing up with stories from the old country, and then my parents, who were born like in 1941 and 1943 in Canada, were just raised with this constant tension and terror because they'd heard such vivid stories as children, and it imprinted on them in a way that I as the next generation couldn't understand or rationalize at all. And her need to disappear and be something else, while still pulled towards finding out what happened to her parents and needing to know where the bodies are, and all of this stuff that just roils inside of her. And as you say, it's the acting. It's I'm going to butcher her name. I'm so sorry. Agata Trzebuchowska, who just wears it behind her eyes somehow. It's in her frame.
Yeah.
All these contradictions.
Yeah. What I love about this story too is, so she does give it a try, right?
I think she genuinely wants it. For a while.
She goes out and she puts on the dress after her aunt dies. She puts on the dress and smokes a cigarette and has sex, most likely for the first time. Mm-hmm. And it decides it's that moment where she says to that musician, and I'm glad he picked a musician. What he invites her to go on tour with him, and then they can walk on the beach. And then she says, "What after that?" And he says, "We'll get a dog and a house and have kids. And then what? And then what?"
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, right? Then what? And it's not as satisfying for her as to staying at the convent. Why? It doesn't matter. She's more satisfied. She has a choice there. She's at that fork, and she chooses to go back to the convent because it's home, it's comfort, it's whatever. I don't know. It's spirituality that she feels she needs.
Yeah.
But she tried it. She got a taste of it, which I just think is brilliant. Brilliant.
Yeah. My take on the ending is that then what is, she wants to know what his faith is. She wants to know what he really believes will happen in the end. And I think that's the other thing too, as a Holocaust survivor, or the child of people who were killed in the Holocaust, she is obsessed with the idea of being protected after death because she's been so close to it.
Yes.
And then what is, that's the question, right? And that's the question the whole movie is asking, because there is no possible answer that will satisfy anybody.
Yeah.
Does she want to be reunited with her parents in an afterlife where, being Jews, they wouldn't be permitted? Since she's going Catholic, does she hope that there's something else, that there's is she asking him to give her an alternate faith, another way to believe something after death is possible? I don't know, right? I don't have the answer to that, but I feel the yearning in that performance, and her need to have more concrete information, which is, inherently a contradiction. She can never know. None of us can know. Yeah. It's about faith.
It's about faith. And it doesn't matter what faith, what church, in a way. It's just about faith. What fills us up? What makes us feel whole? Mm-hmm. And I think he accomplished that, and a lot of other things, when he made that film.
Yeah.
It's interesting, it just reminded me, as you were talking about, I come from a very strict Catholic family, and way back in the early 90s, I went to Malta on my own. I was working in Paris, and then just thought, I'm going to pop in. And back then, it's like cowboy boots, blue jeans, T-shirts, and smoking a pack of Camels a day, kind of thing. And there was this aunt. I have thousands of relatives, but this aunt, Josephine, who was a nun. And I don't know why I decided to go visit her at the convent. And of course, I probably reeked of cigarette. I smelled like an ashtray. But
I just assume everybody did at that time.
Okay, good, thanks. And I was pretty rough around the edges, and I didn't I wasn't believing in anything at that point, right? I didn't believe in anything, like church especially. And I was very disappointed in God. But I went to the convent, and it's like all of a sudden I felt like I was cleansed. It was a really overblown, like this sensation of light that came over me when I walked in there. I was like, okay, but I was still like, what's going on here? And I met Josephine, my aunt, and this tiny woman who had spent time in prison in China because of the cause or something. And she did a lot of like missionary work and stuff like that. And she spoke like this, and she won me over. I mean, not that I became a Catholic, but at the last bit of my visit with her, she said, let's go to the chapel. It's like, all right. And I sat in the chapel with her, and she said, let's pray for your journey home. And I'm like, I don't believe. And she said, that's okay. Would you mind just kneeling and I'll pray? I was like, sure. All right. And it was this non-judgmental, pure kindness from this woman. And I think of that when I watched Ida, I was thinking of that experience I had at that convent, and I kind of get it, I get the awe of it.
Hey, it's Norm, interrupting my own show to tell you about the latest Shiny Things newsletter, my weekly dispatch about physical media, culture, and the odd streaming thing. This week, I wrote about George Miller's fantastical 3,000 Years of Longing and the Shout Factory 4K releases of Dog Soldiers and Cat People, because how do you pass up that pairing? Subscribe for the price of a latte at shiny-things.ghost.io or find a link at the Semcast Twitter account. Did you miss me writing about stuff? So did I. Come check it out. I always wondered myself, I've never had any particular religious convictions. I'm like full on, people are the only thing to have faith in, because in the end, that's all we have. But and this has come up a couple of times on the podcast, because we deal with films with these themes. I kind of envy people who have some sort of abiding faith, because it's a way of seeing the world that I just can't access.
Yeah.
And I understand the impulse. I understand where religion came from and why people needed something to believe in, especially with, lives being shorter, harder, more brutal, hundreds of thousands of years, however far back you want to go when this stuff all came together. It must be comforting to think that there's someone watching out for you when someone else gets crushed by the rock, that, God saved you, so you must be good. And it just sort of plays into a sense of not status exactly, but standing, that then takes over and becomes institutional, and then you see people abuse it almost immediately. Yeah. But I admire the conviction and the commitment in people who have the articulation, not the articulation. How can I articulate this? Who have the commitment to the actual tenets of, say, Christianity, good works, helping people, charity. So many people just claim that they're being good Christians while shutting down all the things that, Christ supposedly stood for and spoke of. And now there's this schism even further with the Catholic Church and the institutional disregard for humanity, and the residential schools in Canada and all the other things that are happening. And Ida, of course, is dealing in some way with the fact that the church looked the other way during World War II and enabled all of these horrors in Eastern Europe. And that's something that, Pawlikowski himself experienced. I think his paternal grandfather died in the Holocaust, which he didn't realize until much later in life. Wow. And this film feels like the most personal thing, other than The Woman in the Fifth, which is so clearly in conversation with his loss of his wife. His wife died in, I think it was 2006, after several months of something. He won't speak of it. He won't even say her name. Wow. I've interviewed him a couple of times, and he's very polite about it, but he just keeps saying he can't go there. And The Woman in the Fifth feels like his struggle to explain that in a film about connection and loss. And then Ida feels like him trying to reconcile with his grandfather and his identity as a Polish national coming out of this country with this hideous history. And he's just so good at not making it about himself that it feels like a genuinely Catholic work in the proper use of the word, right? Like he is creating an inquiry into his own feelings about this sort of thing and putting it on film for all of us, but he removes himself entirely by casting a young woman and just breaking away in that way. And I don't know how he feels about religion, but this feels like he's at peace with himself. Like this is the movie that tells me he's okay.
Yeah. Wow.
If that makes any sense, because that was
that
a
makes
long,
total
long road.
sense. That makes total sense. Yeah.
I mean, Carmen is about religious representation, I guess you could say.
Yeah, for sure. I obviously come from a very sort of Catholic family, and for the longest time, I thought that anyone who wasn't Catholic was wrong. And then it wasn't when I was about 16, I read the Bible a little closely and realized, oh, wait, God doesn't like everybody. Doesn't like homosexuals and stuff like that. And so I broke off and went completely the other way. And then, but struggled with it, constantly struggled with it. And all of my pieces have Jesus in it somehow or another. And
yeah.
And so it's like I've always been looking for God, spirituality, but also ran away from it because of the church and didn't realize you could find spirituality without the church. I hate using the word spirituality, but I don't have another word. I just feel like it's been overused and it's all hooga booga-ish now. But a quick story, back in 2014, I was really down and out about life in general. And I got a phone call out of the blue to give a workshop at Humber College Film School. And I was like, oh, okay. I went there, gave the workshop. It was a 2-day thing. And then I got a phone call or an email from a student saying, would I be his mentor? And I was like, oh, okay. We went I said, we'll have to meet in my neighborhood. We were meeting for coffee. And I said, it was a gorgeous autumn day. And I said, let's go for a walk. And I told him how I got into making films. And then he told me his story. He's a monk.
Okay.
Buddhist monk. And when he was 8 years old, he was pulled out from Tibet and went to Nepal. And he was always curious about cinema, but didn't really know anything about it, even though he was teaching the Buddhist way to Uma Thurman and Jeff Bridges and Tracy Chapman, and
as you do, sure, yeah,
as you do, right? And then we sat on this park bench, and it was this glorious golden tree above us, right? And we were just talking and going in and out of Buddhism, and which I knew nothing about. And I was like, see how that light hits that swing? That's stuff I want to capture. That's perhaps. And then I talked about story, and I said, I wouldn't write about a Buddhist monk because I don't know anything about it unless I researched it. And he goes, ask me anything. Ask me anything. I said, well, what's evil? He said, ask me something else. Anyway, so to get to the end of the story is we were there for hours, by the way, hours until it was too cold. And I said, so how do you pray? Because I have to tell you that so many people said, pray. And I'm like, to whom? I don't know how to pray anymore. And I asked him, and he said, we don't pray. We look at ourselves and think about how we want to change things. And that altered me in a major way as to how to go about my life. Oh, that's a pretty long story. Sorry about that. You can cut it off. Chut. But yeah, so just about spirituality and searching, and I've always been searching. Have used theater and cinema to help me find my way through it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think people who make movies that ask the questions rather than have the answers are generally the more interesting artists, I find. Mm-hmm. And the fact that you never settle, because you can't, you can never, if your purpose is to investigate and explore, there can't be an answer, right? Unless you're making a documentary. And the quest is the most interesting thing, because you never finish. You just keep coming up with your own perspective, and you grow as an artist and you evolve, but you can still, sometimes you reconnect to the earlier work, and you sort of see the person evolve over that is my job still, is to track evolution and take stock of people. Every few years when they make a movie, I get to check in with them, and it's this wonderful emotional experience. And when it's someone who's pursuing, as you say, all your films are pretty Catholic. There's a thing that you're working at that keeps coming back. And I'm always fascinated with the choices you make. And Carmen it's a lighter tone, I think, certainly than the last couple of movies you've made. And I was just wondering if that signifies something about your perspective, or just the way this story needed to be told. How did you land on this version of your movie?
I always try to find humor. I do, because initially it is a pretty sad story, in the sense of this happened to my aunt, and this tradition where a man becomes a priest and his sister goes with him and is his maid till he dies. Right. She doesn't get an education, a salary, or a family of her own. And so once I heard about this tradition, and finding out that my aunt had to go through this, and now 97 years old, I saw her in February, and she said, my life was terrible. She's in tears, and like, wow. So that was the crux of telling this story. But what if is the big question. Like, what if she escaped it? What if she made broad choices? What if a woman took over the confessional booth? So I like to have the layers in it. It comes across as light, but there is a bit of a gravitas in there. Like the woman in the confessional booth who wants to get rid of her husband without murder.
Sure.
Divorce wasn't allowed in Malta till 10 years ago.
Oh, I did not know that.
So, and abortion is still illegal. Dangerously so. You might have read about a woman, I think an American woman in Malta, who needed to have an abortion because of health reasons, and they wouldn't do it for her. And so she had to get flown to Spain, and luckily she survived it. But it's that, that's the stuff that I want to bring forth. It comes without being preachy. So I like to use humor to make people aware. I feel like it's an easier way to live life. It's an easier way to digest a story.
Yeah, I can see that. And in the meantime, you're also, you're allowing yourself a lighter story by kind of doing the service for your aunt and giving her a better outcome.
Yeah.
Which is really kind of sweet and small, and something that floats along in the movie.
Yeah.
I mean, if we didn't know, right? If the audience wasn't aware, they would just be watching a fiction, and instead you're creating a happier ending in an alternate reality.
Yeah, and this also happens in so many places. When I came back came back from Malta after I heard about that tradition, I spoke to friends, and they said, "Oh yeah, my aunt in Ireland did the same, or someone else in India did the same." And if it's not to take care of their brother, the priest, it's to stay back and take care of their grandparents. It's always the daughter who stays back. Yeah.
Pitched as generational duty, when it's really just a way of not asking questions about what else would you rather do, or what else could be possible.
Exactly. And I mean, the crux of this story is the female voice. And I use the confessional booth to help her find her voice.
It's a great device. And Natasha McElhone just has such an amazing face for that sort of thing. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to watch her. I'm so glad you guys found each other.
Yeah, it was an incredible collaboration. From our first FaceTime meeting, she understood the film, which is fantastic, in so many levels. And then when she came to Malta, and we just walked and talked for hours about beats in the film and so forth. And then she comes on set with her binder with her script and all the colored chips as to all those nuances that you witnessed. Yeah.
That's wonderful. I'm so glad it worked out. And the final question on the podcast is always the same. I think we've sort of dealt with it already, but just in case, is there anything from Ida that you have adapted, adopted, borrowed, outright stolen for your own work? It feels tonally very different, but I get the sense there's some stuff. Like I said, the framing of like making Carmen smaller in the beginning. Sure, yeah. And even the confessional does sort of replicate a 4x3 feeling here and there, right? Because people are being boxed in. Yeah. And because I'm not a famous director, I couldn't demand for more. I mean, it caused issues. The fact that I didn't want to see a lot of Carmen in the beginning. Like I wanted to see her small. Producers weren't keen on that. So it was, I'm going to just be honest. It was, it's tough to push for something like what he made, like Ida, you know. But so, yeah. But maybe for the next one. Yeah. I mean, something like It's Hard to Be Human feels like a more aggressive spiritual inquiry. Yeah. But this still gets the point across in a really elegant sort of way. Yeah. Thank you. Yes. It's hard to be human. Was me really in the midst of searching for some reason. And then Carmen is me settling. I feel. Settling cinematically or for life? No, not cinematically, but with my relationship to the church. Yeah, neither of you is going anywhere, so you might as well make it work for people. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's not the right word because I'm still questioning lots of things and maybe not settling, but accepting. Could that be it? Just accepting that's the way it is and surrendering to the fact that it is what it is. And yeah, I can see. Yeah. But at the same time, she's doing her best to make it a little bit better. Yeah. Which, yeah, that's something to take away, I think, when the movie's over. Just the sense that certainly it's in Pawlikowski's work, but it seems to be Carmen's message too. Like the institution is inflexible and immortal, eternal anyway. Too big to fail or however you want to frame it. But one person is making that parish better for its people. And that's important. Yeah. It's the starfish thing, right? A man comes upon another man on a beach. He's throwing starfish back into the sea. They've been beached by a big tide, and the beach is full of starfish. And the first man says to the other, "Why are you doing that? That it won't make any difference." And the man holding a starfish throws it back into the water and says, "It makes a difference to this one." Yeah. And that's kind of what Carmen feels like to me. Like it's not the result, it's the effort. Exactly. Thank you. Of course. This is what I do. No, you're right. Okay. Cool. My thanks to Valerie Buhagiar, whose new film Carmen is in theaters across Canada right now and opening in the US September 23rd. Thanks also to Laura Steen and Angie Power. They know what they did. You can follow Valerie on Twitter at Valerie Buhagiar, all one word, and you can find Ida on Blu-ray and DVD from Music Box Films and streaming for free on Canopy and Tubi in the US and Canada. It's also available to rent or buy on various VOD platforms. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Norm Wilner, and you can find this podcast there at Semcast, SEMcast, and on the web at someoneelsesmovie.com. The first year of the podcast is still available for just $20 at payhip.com/Semcast. That's the first 52 episodes of Someone Else's Movie, 46 of which aren't currently available anywhere else. And check out my newsletter, Shiny Things, at shiny-things.ghost.io. I think you'll enjoy it. Our theme song is by The Last Year. If you like it or the show in general, please say so. Leave a review wherever you've been listening. Every little bit helps, it truly does. And check out the other shows on the Frequency Podcast Network while you're doing that. Stay safe, watch movies, wear a mask if you go out, get your booster when you can, buy your TIFF tickets. I'll see you next time.